Hello everybody and welcome to the Game Institute's little training videos here on Blender. My name is Christian Bradley and I will be walking you through Blender in these videos. Just a little bit about how these videos are going to work. We're assuming that we're starting with no knowledge of Blender whatsoever. So if you do know something about Blender, or maybe you've used it, or maybe you've even used some other 3D program, you might want to skip ahead a few videos because for the first 2 or 3 videos here we're going to be covering some very basic stuff. Also, I would recommend that if you have not used Blender before, that you go over these first few videos a few times to get your feet wet and get used to the interface. I know from my own experience, I've used quite a few different 3D programs, and I found Blender to be a little bit different than all the other 3D programs I was used to. So it took a little bit of getting my feet under me to kind of understand how Blender works. All right, so let's get into it. Right here we have the basic startup scene for Blender. There are a few things that we can see here. This big grid right here, we'll talk about him before the end of the video. Right now he's just there to show you where the floor plane is. This little guy up here is a lamp, and we're going to deal with him in a second. This guy over here is a camera, and this box right here is a mesh object. Right now we're working in what's called object mode. And object mode is kind of the starting point for everything that you're going to make in Blender. If you're used to Max or Maya, these are called something like primitive mode. Blender does have something akin to an edit mesh mode. Again, if you're if you've used Max before, that is what it calls edit mode. Now, getting used to those modes, if you've used a program like Maya, might be a little bit confusing, but trust me, all 3 of those programs, Max, Maya, and Blender, are very similar, yet very different. So there really isn't a good way to come into this other than to just jump in and start learning. All right, our box here is very boring that we have. So let's take a look at the scene or the screen here and a very quick tour of what we're looking at, and then we'll get in here and do something with this box before the end of the video. The first thing is, over here on the right are your transforms. Now, these transforms are not particularly useful for most things that we're going to be doing. You would think that they would be. So again, Max and Maya have their transforms very obviously displayed on the menu. Blender's transforms not so much. You can see here there really isn't much we can do with this. We could certainly delete it, mirror it, scale, rotate, translate, but there's easier ways to do that. The only button I really use over here too much is the smooth button for the shading and the join button. But if we were to hit N on our keyboard, then it opens up this menu, which you can also see is also called transform, strangely enough. And that transform has much more information. Again, that is the N key. And this key, we have things like the location of our object, so I can slide this around. And you can see I can move my object all over the place. I'm going to kind of intentionally move my object off center here. So something like that. We can rotate this object all over the place, all sorts of stuff, and we can scale it if we want. Now, what if we want to get our object back to the center? The reason I cover this early in the video is that it's very important to Blender is to be working in the center. A lot of its modifiers work straight off the center. Again, some other 3D programs, it's not so important. The modifiers kind of follow the object around. Blender really likes its objects right smack in the center. So what I'm going to do is click on each of these and I'm going to zero them out. So when you hear me say something like zero out the transforms of your object, well, that's what I'm talking about, is just zeroing these guys out. Whoops, I don't want to zero out the scale. Sorry about that. And what we'll do is just make our scale 1 here. There we go. So when I say zero out the transforms, it means to center the object on that grid. All right, that's these guys up here. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see that there are some other options in here that are not necessarily tied to our object. Now I find it kind of strange that they're here in the transform menu. However, we can use them. That's fine. And not everything in this menu has to do with that object, obviously. There's things like the grease pencil are located in here. Our view settings, which are very important. Things like our lens settings, we can change around. We can come down here to our clip settings. So if you're having trouble with seeing what you need to see here, you can change your clipping settings so that you can zoom in a little bit more. Here's our 3D cursor location, which we did not talk about the 3D cursor. The 3D cursor is that guy right there, and we're going to be talking about him in the next video. The 3D cursor is one of the main differences between this program and Max or Maya. 3D cursor took me a while to get used to. Here is our item, our cube down here, and you can see we have things like display settings. Here is your grid settings, so I can turn that grid off, and in a few videos down the road you'll see that I'll turn that grid off for good, because I really don't use the grid too much right now, but I'll leave it on for the time being. There's your grid settings. Here's your quad view. So if you are very used to working in the quad view, maybe like an architectural view or for engineering, previs stuff, you certainly can work in the quad view. I will not be working much in the quad view for what I'm doing, so I'm going to turn that off. And we have things like shading, lots of things that you would be used to. So with that in mind, let's go over here and take a look at this guy, which is your outliner. Almost forgot what it was called. I'm used to this being called, I forgot now. Anyway, Max and Maya both have something like this. This mentions everything in your scene. So you can see here we have a world, we have a camera, a cube, a lamp. I can click on each of these and it will highlight them. So you can see there is my lamp. That is the equivalent of a point light right there. A cube right there, you'll see that it outlines it. And a camera. And my camera, which is not what I'm looking through, by the way, right now. I'm looking through a viewport, is highlighted there. Now, what you might want to do is, just for practice, go ahead and select the lamp in your scene and hit the delete button on your keyboard. And you have to come over here and I'll hit delete. And the delete button actually does delete. Many of the keys have nothing seemingly to do with what they're not named the same, but delete is. And if we just hit delete again here, it's going to get rid of my lamp and my lamp will disappear. Why don't you do the same thing with the camera? Just highlight camera, come over here, make sure your cursor is in the viewport and hit delete and delete again. That's just so you can get used to cleaning up your scene. We don't always want to delete those, but they're good ones to delete for now. We don't necessarily need them. Okay, now with our cube selected, and you can either click on your cube or you can click over here off of the cube and click over on this area. With our cube selected, we're going to go into what is called edit mode. Now there is two ways to get to edit mode. You can either come down here where it says object mode and just click edit mode. Not much changes, but you'll see some of the menus here will change a little bit. Or you can just hit tab on your keyboard and it will automatically switch to edit. So tab switches from edit to object mode. You'll probably see me doing both ways, mainly because I am lazy and don't hit the tab key all the time. So you'll see me come down here and click here sometimes. All right, well, now we're in edit mode. Edit mode means we get more things because we can edit now. We can actually do something to our box. So let's make some very quick changes to our box. I'm going to highlight my box by hovering above the box with my mouse and hitting A. And A is going to select everything on the box. So you notice everything on my box is selected. By the way, I'm holding down the middle mouse button to rotate this around. If your mouse is not working the same as mine, that's okay. We're going to go over the preferences here in just a minute. So if you are not able to rotate your box around, it's not going to matter right now. All right, with that in mind, go ahead and hit Control R. And what Control R is going to do, if you hover your mouse above your box, is make a little pink line, and that line is an edge. And so you can see when I click on my box, I can now move that edge around, and it won't go any higher than the top or bottom, but now I can move my edge. Control Z is undo. I'm going to undo this real quick just to show you some other options that you got. I can hit Control R and move my middle mouse wheel to make more edges. Now that's one way to do it. All things in Blender seem to have many, many different options on how to do it. So I'm going to hit again Shift R and Control R. Sorry, there we go. Wrong program. And I'm going to click. Now this time, without really doing too much, I'm going to set that in place. And then see, these guys just popped up. And you might not have noticed, but they weren't there a minute ago. And the loop cut and slide feature is basically activated because we just made an edge loop. And here is the number of cuts, so I can bump that up. I can either type it in or I'm going to hit that button right there. And you can see that I can make more edge loops. I'm going to zoom in there so you can see it. That will make more edge loops. See that? So now, wow, that's pretty cool. So what we're going to do is go ahead and hit S, which is scale. Scale is also this button right here. So when I hit S, you'll see it activates scale. I can scale in all directions to make kind of a jewel-like structure there. By the way, we do have some transforms down here. This is scale. So if you're used to using the transform, you can do that or hit S on the keyboard. This is rotate. And again, that would be R on the keyboard. And this is move, or Blender calls it grab. Now, I know Max calls that transform. This one in Blender is called grab. It is the G button. And what that will allow us to do is to move that around. So again, those keys are very important because you're going to use them a lot. It's G for move or grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. G is the only weird one. All right. Also, if you hit that little button there, that little multicolored button by accident, it closes them all down. Just hit that button again to open them back up. All right, well, that's nifty, but let's do something a little bit neater. I'm going to go down to these three buttons. I have vertices, edges, and polygons. And I'm right down here if you can't see me there on the screen. I'm going to click edges. I'm going to click one edge, hold down Alt, and select all the way around. And Alt is going to select an edge loop. So that is the edge button. It doesn't work the same for vertices or polygons, but it does work for edge loops. All right, well, that's pretty nifty. And what I'm going to do now is go in here and split that edge or bevel it. So I'm going to hit W, and I am going to go to bevel, which is also Control B. So remember, we got to this menu by hitting W, but Control B would just go straight to bevel. And what I'm going to do is then move my mouse around, and it takes me a little while to get there we go, to get that beveled. See how I can just split that edge there? And you'll see I get some choices over here with my beveling. Pretty nifty. And we can come in here. Now we don't really have any segments, so I'm going to add some segments to this. I'm going to zoom in because this bevel tool has a really cool feature to it. If I can, there we go. And that is that if I add some segments, now remember this just popped up here because I used bevel. This will only stay here as long as you are still in bevel mode. As soon as I click on something else, that's going to disappear forever. A little bit different in Blender than other programs. And I have 5 segments there. And so what I can do is then bevel that differently. See how I can change the bevel? And this is a really cool feature in in Blender. And so here, what I'm doing is changing the profile. I really like this part of Blender to make a different curve, and that's the profile button right there. So now you'll see when I click on anything else, so if I want to go over here and I go say to polygon and I click on something else, well, this is still here, and I could still change it for a while as long as those faces are selected. But as soon as I select something else, oh, it's still going to allow me to set it. Okay. Well, that's very nice of it. It doesn't usually do that. All right, so we'll come back to that. All right, next, let's go ahead and just make a little indentation here at the top. I'm going to click on the top polygon there. Now this time what I want to do is basically extrude out a polygon to go across and then down. Now Blender's extrude and bevel work differently, at least than what I was used to in Max. Max, I could bevel this and it would bevel across the surface. In Blender, it's basically an extrude. So if I hit the E button, now I just extruded that. So that's the E button. Now here's the tricky part. And this one's, the guys that have been watching me on the streaming videos know I screw this up all the time. If you hit E, and then change your mind, and you just click on this, what you have done is created another polygon. And so you can really mess up your meshes easily, as I do seemingly all the time, by messing this E button up. So I'm going to hit E, and I'm going to hit S to scale it down. Then I'm going to click, I'm going to hit E again, and move downward. Okay, so if you get lost in that, you have to extrude. Now it's extruding, whether you want to stop or not, it's extruding right now. So I'm going to hit ES for scale, click to stop the extrude, and then I'm going to hit extrude again and extrude up. So if that's confusing, it just make a box and practice with it a little bit, because I found that very confusing when I started. The extrude does not terminate just because you stopped the extrusion. It makes the extrusion when you hit E, and that means it just made another polygon on top of another polygon. So unless you do something with that or undo twice to back up, you're going to have a lot of double polygons. I don't know. Maybe nobody else has trouble with that but me, but I had a lot of trouble with that. Okay. All right, one other thing I want to show you here, and that is if you want to set Blender up to be a little bit more like another program, say Max or Maya, you can. Now, I would definitely try this out first before you fall in love with anything. The presets over here, well, I was talking while I did that. Go to File, User Preferences, which is Control-Alt-U. And over here, under Input, you can find some helpful things. For instance, under Presets, you can set it up to be similar to Max or Maya. Now, I've used a lot of Max before, so I originally just popped 3ds Max on here thinking that would help. It didn't really help. The problem was it's not all the same key commands in Max translate over to Blender. That really would be impossible if you think about it. There's just too many key commands. And the interface is just different. It calls things different stuff. I undid that quickly. But what I did do is leave everything the default, except I now select with the left instead of the right button. And I believe in Blender the right button is the default. That drove me nuts because no other program I've been using is the default, the right button to click on stuff. So for selecting, I clicked on the left, and then I often change from orbit style from turntable to trackball because that's what I'm used to. So turntable, you saw me spinning this around. It's like spinning your object around on a record player. It'll rotate on one axis. Trackball will rotate on all three axes simultaneously. However, I think if you're a beginner, you might want to leave it on turntable. If you've used a 3D program, you might want to click on trackball and give that a try. So everything else that I've changed, we're going to cover in a future program. However, I did want to point out that all of the key commands are set up. Let's look at 3D view. Here you go. 3D view is a common one. All your key commands are set up over here. So something like object mode, there's all your key commands for object mode, just as an example. So you might want to go in here and take a look at the key commands for certain things like maybe object mode and edit mode, mesh, some of the more common functions that we're going to be working with in the next couple days. Mainly because Blender loves key commands. And most people don't have a problem with that. They like the key command shortcuts a lot better than clicking on the menus. I traditionally teach in a campus classroom, so I tend to use the menus so students can see what it is I'm doing, because a lot of times it doesn't really do me any good to just be clicking buttons really quick if they don't know what I'm clicking. However, Blender just will not work that way. If you don't learn the key commands, you're kind of doomed. Just using the menu isn't going to get you very far. There's just too many parts and pieces of Blender that really can only be accessed with the key commands. Even though the menu looks a little daunting, there just isn't as much in the Blender menu as there might be in other programs. The key commands are really where you're going to have to focus. So if you don't like using keys, well, you're going to have to get used to it, because I don't think you can get very far in Blender if you're not going to use the key commands. So there you go. So that's going to do it for this video. We'll be back in the next one and take off where we left off here. Thanks. Bye-bye.